Ruthless millionaire spots, pregnant ex-wife, working at Starbucks while dining with new girlfriend. Welcome to Alcott Stories. Get ready for an unforgettable journey of love, pain, redemption, and second chances. This is not just a story. It's a powerful tale of transformation that will touch your heart and stay with you long after the final chapter. So grab a warm drink, settle in, and watch this beautiful story unfold till the very end. And if you enjoy heartfelt, emotional storytelling, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join the Alcott Stories family. Damon Voss didn't just walk. He glided through space like a man who owned it. Every step he took in his black Italian leather shoes sounded less like a footstep and more like a statement. The floor of Voss International's corporate skyscraper was made of polished marble, white with streaks of gold that shimmered under the artificial lights like veins of treasure. His office sat atop the 87th floor in the heart of Manhattan, surrounded by glass walls that overlooked a skyline kissed by clouds, as if even the city itself bent to his presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, and immaculately dressed in a tailored Tom Ford suit with cufflinks that bore his initials in diamonds, Damon was the embodiment of icy perfection. Everything about him exuded an air of ruthless success, from the steel in his gaze to the silence that followed him like a loyal guard dog. He was the kind of man you didn't speak to unless spoken to. The kind of man who could destroy your career with a raised eyebrow. The kind of man who never smiled unless there was something in it for him. Born into an old money family of elite aristocrats, Damon had grown up surrounded by whispers of legacy and lectures on superiority. His father, Calvin Voss, was a former senator with views as archaic as they were dangerous, an open supporter of arranged marriages, racial purity, and social hierarchy masked under the guise of tradition. His mother, Vivian, an ex-model turned socialite, believed appearances weren't just important. They were everything. From a young age, Damon was taught to polish his shoes more often than express his emotions. Compassion was weak. Diversity was a burden. Black skin, brown hands, and street English were signs of failure in their household. His schoolmates were carefully selected by social class and skin tone. His childhood friends were limited to the children of other magnates. Even his first crush, a girl named Annabelle, whose father owned several gold mines, had been evaluated not for her personality, but for the shade of her eyes. Beauty is power, his mother often said, but white beauty rules the world. As Damon grew older, he didn't rebel against these ideas, he refined them. By 20, he was the youngest CEO in his family's history, turning a stagnant inheritance into a financial empire with ruthless strategies and cold business moves. He bought out startups, crushed competition, fired entire departments with a single click, and never once lost sleep over it. He didn't believe in charity. Philanthropy was a PR stunt. And love? Love was a business deal dressed up in poetry. In Damon's world, people were assets or liabilities, and most people, especially the poor or those who didn't fit into his elite image, were the latter. Voss International became known not only for its financial dominance, but for its toxic culture. Where wealth was worshipped, appearance mattered more than talent, and Damon's cold rule set the tone. Women who weren't thin, white, and fashionably dressed were dismissed as not brand compatible. Men who showed emotion were labeled weak, and anyone who came from a struggling background was quietly pushed out. Damon didn't yell. He didn't need to. A single look, a cutting remark, a sarcastic chuckle was enough to dismantle someone's confidence in seconds. It was on a rainy Thursday morning that a particular incident solidified Damon's title as the Ice King among his employees. The clouds loomed low over Manhattan, casting a shadow over the city like a warning. Inside the Voss Tower, however, everything gleamed. The receptionist desk sparkled, the fragrance of designer cologne hung in the air, and the tension was as thick as fog. Damon had called for a team meeting, a rare event that always sent a wave of nervousness through the staff. Everyone knew what these meetings meant. Someone was getting fired. As he stepped into the executive boardroom, his presence alone silenced the room. The chatter ceased. Laptops closed, chairs straightened. His icy blue eyes scanned the room like lasers. Then came a soft knock on the glass door. All heads turned. It was Zariah, a young black intern fresh out of college, assigned to the legal department. She was bright, hard-working, and quiet. Too quiet for this office. Her skin was a rich, beautiful cocoa tone that glowed even under the fluorescent lights. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun, and she wore a plain blouse and slacks, not because she lacked style, but because she couldn't afford luxury brands. In her hands she held a file, important documents that Damon had requested. She took a breath and stepped into the room. Every eye watched her, not with respect, but with judgment. She walked slowly, her heels clicking against the tile, the sound awkward compared to Damon's commanding strides. As she approached, she offered the folder with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "Sir, here's the contract you asked for," she said softly. Damon didn't take the folder. He stared at her hands, her face, her clothes, assessing, dissecting, judging. Then, with a voice as sharp as a winter wind, he said, "Are those your real nails? Or is this some new welfare program I don't know about?" The room gasped. Zariah froze. Her eyes widened, but she didn't speak. Damon finally took the folder, flipped through the pages as if nothing had happened, then handed it to his assistant without a glance. "Next time," he added, "send someone who knows how to dress like they work here." His voice wasn't loud, but it was final. Zariah stood for a moment longer, face burning, then turned and walked out without a word. The silence in the room was suffocating. No one dared defend her. No one dared meet Damon's eyes. To them, this was just another day in the kingdom of ice. And Damon, he didn't feel a thing. In his mind, he'd done nothing wrong. He was just upholding standards. If people wanted to work in his world, they had to look the part. The part, of course, being a polished, elite, white aesthetic. Anything else was unworthy. He walked to the head of the table, his fingers tracing the edge of the polished oak as he spoke to the team, laying out merger plans and stock forecasts with mechanical brilliance. Not once did his mind return to Zariah or her broken spirit. He didn't see her tears in the elevator, or how she avoided the cafeteria that day. He didn't notice when she resigned quietly the following week, her desk cleared out by a friend. To Damon Voss, she was a line on a spreadsheet, a minor glitch, an error corrected. He ended the meeting with a nod, his voice cool as always. Excellence has no sympathy, only results. The sun broke through the tall glass windows of the Voss estate, casting golden bars of light across the polished marble floors like a cage. Damon stood at the far end of the grand hall, his hands shoved into the pockets of his custom-tailored navy suit. He wasn't a man built for waiting, but today he had no choice. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on nothing, yet burning with a silent storm. The word marriage echoed in his head like a curse. He had signed the papers in silence, Just hours earlier, beneath the stern eyes of his father and the polite tyranny of his mother's approval, he hadn't flinched. Not once. But inside, rage burned like acid. He, Damon Voss, the architect of his own empire, the man who bent billion-dollar industries with a phone call, was being reduced to a chess piece in an ancient game of family honor. His rebellion wasn't loud. It was colder than fury. He'd go through with it, yes, but he'd do so with a heart made of stone and eyes that promised no welcome. The ceremony was held in the ancestral chapel on the Voss countryside estate, an opulent cathedral trimmed in gold leaf and imported orchids. Guests arrived in fleets of black sedans, their shoes clicking over marble, their whispers slick with judgment. Damon stood at the altar like a statue carved from ice, flawless suit, hair immaculate, expression blank. Not a single emotion passed over his face as the music began and the wooden doors creaked open, and there she was. Amala Bennett. She entered alone, walking slowly down the aisle. No veil covered her face. Her eyes were uncovered, vulnerable. Her dress wasn't dripping in jewels or corseted couture, just simple, flowing white silk that brushed the polished floor beneath her. Her skin radiated a natural glow, her frame graceful, grounded, quietly regal. A gentle curl framed her temple, and she walked with the posture of someone carrying more than just fabric, someone carrying history, hope, and honor. Damon didn't look at her. Not once. Even as she reached the altar and stood beside him, barely inches between them, he didn't turn his head. His eyes locked on the officiant, as if staring into the void. He didn't speak until prompted. When the vows came, his voice was flat, mechanical. He slipped the ring on her finger, like it was a part of a contract being finalized. A legal arrangement, nothing more. When the priest declared them husband and wife, there was no kiss, not even a glance. Amala, however, turned to him. She looked into the face of the man she had been given to, unasked, unchosen, and offered a gentle smile. A gesture that asked for nothing. A symbol of quiet willingness. She had accepted the burden her parents had placed in her hands without protest. To her, duty was not a chain, but a path. She did not love Damon. Not yet. But she would try. Because that's what dignity did. That's what honor meant. The ride back to the mansion was long and silent. Damon sat beside her in the limousine, his gaze fixed out the tinted window. His fingers tapped once against his knee. Then stilled, Amala folded her hands in her lap, watching the trees blur by. She didn't speak. She didn't beg. She wasn't a fool. She had seen his disdain, felt the chill in his silence. But she also believed in time, and in the power of small kindnesses to melt walls, not by force, but by presence. That night, their wedding suite was dimly lit and untouched. A four-poster bed stood at the center like a stage no one had rehearsed for. Damon entered first, loosened his tie, and walked straight to the guest room next door. He didn't say good night, didn't acknowledge her. Amala stood in the middle of the room for a moment, alone in her dress. Then, with a soft sigh, she began to undress, folding each piece with care before changing into simple cotton. She lay in bed, with the quiet ache of knowing she was married in name only. But still, she prayed, not for love, just for peace. Days passed, then weeks. Damon remained a stranger who shared nothing but a surname. He left for work before she rose, returned long after she slept. She made breakfast. It went cold. She left fresh flowers in the study. He never noticed. She cleaned his cufflinks, pressed his suits, placed small notes by his briefcase, wishing him a good day. He never replied. And yet, she did not grow bitter. She simply adjusted, smiled at the staff, tended the small greenhouse at the back of the mansion, sent money to her parents, built a life in the margins of a man who refused to see her. But Amala was not weak. She was watching, learning, observing the empire that Damon had built around himself like a fortress. She saw how alone he truly was, despite the opulence, how no one in his life ever said his name with warmth, how he carried a war inside him, between legacy and loneliness. She saw the cracks, even if he didn't. One evening, during a thunderstorm, a fuse blew in the east wing. The mansion went black. Damon, annoyed, emerged from his study. He found Amale in the kitchen, lighting candles. She looked up at him, her face soft in the glow, and smiled. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. It was the first time she'd spoken to him in days. He stared at her for a moment. Something flickered in his eyes. He didn't answer, just turned away. But he didn't walk far. He stood by the doorway as she moved around the kitchen, her hands graceful, her expression calm. She wasn't begging for affection. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply being. And for a moment, Damon Voss, the man who worshipped status and image, felt something unfamiliar stir beneath his ribs. Not love, but curiosity. And that, for the first time, made him pause. The storm outside howled louder, rattling the windows. Amale placed a cup of tea on the counter between them and gently pushed it toward him. Damon stared at it, then at her. Her eyes met his, not with challenge, not with pleading, just presence. The clock ticked, the candle flickered, and for the first time since their wedding, Damon spoke her name. Amale. She looked at him, surprised but steady. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. The walls hadn't fallen, but something had shifted. And in that silence, something rare began to grow. Not romance, but recognition. And sometimes, the quietest beginnings carry the strongest roots. Damon didn't drink it. He stood still in the kitchen doorway, Amala just steps away, the soft candle light catching the quiet grace in her face. His name still lingered in the air. He had said it, her name, for the first time. But instead of reaching across the fragile bridge he had unknowingly built, he turned and walked away. She watched his retreating back until it disappeared into the dark corridor, leaving the candle's flickering glow to dance alone. Amale exhaled gently, the kind of breath that carried both hope and heartbreak in equal measure. She didn't follow him. She didn't expect a thank you or a glance over his shoulder. The mere whisper of her name from his lips had been a crack in the glacier, and for her, that was enough for tonight. The days that followed slipped quietly into routine. Damon remained distant, still entombed in his empire of silence. He left the house early, returned late, spoke only when necessary, and even then his words were as clipped as the sharp edges of the glass in his office. But Amale stayed, not like a shadow chasing light, but like the moon, constant, even when unseen. She woke before the sun. She brewed his coffee the way he liked, strong, no sugar, always in the black ceramic mug he preferred. She ironed his suits with a reverence that bordered on ritual, smoothing each crease like it mattered. She shined his shoes. She replaced his watch batteries before he noticed they were dying. When he caught a cold one morning, she left warm soup by his study, garnished with fresh ginger and lemon. He didn't say thank you. but she knew he drank it. She learned the quiet ways of the mansion, the groan of the floorboard outside the guest wing, the way the wind made the attic moan like a ghost. She brought warmth to places that had forgotten how to feel. She left little touches behind: fresh towels, lavender-scented candles, home-cooked meals, a folded blanket by the library couch. Her care was not loud. It did not demand to be seen, but it was there, threaded into every corner of the life he refused to share. And each night, without fail, she waited until the clock struck 11, the time she knew he'd retire to the guest room, and stood just outside his door. She never knocked. She never entered. She simply stood there, hands folded against her chest, heart full of quiet ache. And she whispered it like a vow. "Good night, Damon." Every night, like a heartbeat, even when his silence was thunder, even when he never answered. He heard her, every time. Sometimes it was a whisper through the door, sometimes through the floorboards, as he sat alone in the study, glass in hand, staring into the dark. He'd never admit it, not to himself, not to anyone. But that simple good night haunted him more than anything. Not because it was loud or desperate or dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was the kind of love that expected nothing, the kind that asked for no reward, the kind he had never known, never understood, and never deserved. And yet, there it was, every night, like the ticking of a clock in a quiet room. Outside the walls of the mansion, the world knew Damon Voss as ruthless, calculated, brilliant. Inside, he had never felt smaller. Amalia's presence wasn't loud, but it filled the rooms in ways his money never had. Her laughter was rare, but when it happened, soft, barely audible. It stayed in the air long after she left. She never touched his belongings without reason. But he began to notice when her touch was absent. The coffee that tasted wrong, the tie that was wrinkled, the silence that felt different. The house had once been immaculate, but lifeless. Now it pulsed with something unspoken, but Damon resisted. Every time he saw her, a knot pulled tighter inside his chest. Guilt, maybe, or fear. She was everything he claimed to hate: humble, gentle, real. She made him feel seen, and being seen felt dangerous. So he looked past her, walked past her, spoke past her. But every night, when the lights went out and the walls stripped him bare, her whisper returned. "Good night, Damon." He never answered, but she never stopped. And slowly, the house began to change, not in its marble or its chandeliers, but in the spaces in between, the way his footsteps slowed as he passed her in the garden, the way his eyes paused on her silhouette when she wasn't looking, the way her name lingered in his mind without invitation. Amalia noticed none of this, or perhaps she did, but chose not to show it. Her love had never been a performance. It was quiet resilience, devotion without pride. She spent her days tending the greenhouse, her nights reading poetry, her mornings lighting a spark in a house built to stay cold. She didn't want to melt him. She just wanted to keep the light on, even if he never stepped out of the dark. But something was changing. Not fast, not dramatically. But enough. Enough for Damon to pause one night, hand resting on the doorframe, as her voice came again, soft as breath. "Good night, Damon." And this time, the silence after it felt heavier than usual. He didn't reply, but he didn't move either. He stood there for a long while, listening. And for the first time, maybe, beginning to feel. The hallway stood hushed beneath the breath of midnight, A thin golden line from beneath Damon's bedroom door cast a narrow sliver of light across the floorboards, just wide enough to catch the edge of Amale's shadow as she turned away, having whispered her nightly words of care into the silence once again. But tonight, something different stirred behind that door. Damon had not gone to bed. He stood there, back resting against the frame, glass loose in his hand, the remnants of expensive scotch sloshing gently. He wasn't drunk enough to forget his name, but just enough to blur the lines between thought and impulse. His mind buzzed with the events of the week, a hostile takeover falling through, rumors swirling about his faltering PR image, and the unshakable, infuriating way Amale's soft presence kept slipping beneath his skin like light through a crack. He hated that she lingered, and yet he hadn't stopped listening. Tonight, her good night didn't feel like background noise. It felt like something else. He finished the drink in one swallow, the burn tracing a path down his throat, dulling the sharpness inside his chest. The corridors shifted in his vision just slightly as he stepped out, the shadows curling and stretching with each step. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered a plan. Eleanor was supposed to come over tonight. She had promised him distraction, laughter, control, but she'd never shown up. A text left on read, a lie about being caught in traffic that he didn't believe for a second. He pushed open the master bedroom door, Amale's room, and paused. The scent was different. Lavender and warm linen. The lights were low, the air soft. He blinked, a haze sweeping across his gaze. The silhouette in the bed stirred, pulling the blanket slightly higher. The room swayed, unfamiliar and familiar all at once. "Elena," he murmured, under breath. No answer. But in his fogged mind, he didn't need one. He crossed the room, shedding his blazer, breath shallow, steps heavy. The figure didn't move. He leaned down. Dark curls framed her face, soft, full lips parted slightly in sleep. The moonlight caught the curve of her shoulder, bare and inviting. He reached out. The moment shattered the stillness like a stone thrown into a lake. Amale stirred awake, confused, blinking into the soft blur of night. Her breath caught as Damon touched her cheek, gentle, tentative, unfamiliar. "Damon," she whispered, startled but not afraid. He didn't answer, didn't hear her properly. Her voice, her warmth, merged with the fantasy in his mind. The lines were gone, blurred into the comfort of touch, scent, and escape. He kissed her, soft at first, then with a hunger that had no memory, only instinct. And she, frozen for a heartbeat, melted, because this was the first time her husband had chosen her, reached for her, touched her like she was something worthy of desire. In that moment, Amale believed. She believed he had seen her, not just the caretaker or the woman in his house, but his wife. She gave in, not out of submission, but hope. Hope that after all the silent months, all the cold shoulders and heavy silences, the distance had closed. That finally he had crossed the bridge she had built with her bare hands and broken heart. They made love slowly at first, then fiercely, his hands memorizing what he had long ignored, hers trembling as they clung to what she thought was love, finally awakened. Tears touched her cheeks, but not from pain. They were born of joy, of relief, of belief. She fell asleep in his arms for the first time, and when morning came, her smile was soft, lips still tingling with memory. She rose before him, humming, her body still aching with the tenderness of closeness she had long dreamed of. She bathed, dressed, and cooked breakfast with lighter steps. She set the table for two. Hope had painted the house with new light. But when Damon entered the room, his face was blank, sharper than ice. He paused in the doorway, scanning the setting, confusion flickering behind his eyes, the scent of coffee, the warmth of the kitchen. Amale turned, her smile bright. "Good morning," she said. I just wanted to say, last night meant everything to me." He stiffened. "What are you talking about?" Her smile faltered. "Last night, United States. You came to my room." His eyes narrowed. "Number I didn't." Her breath caught in her throat. "Damon, you did. You called me Eleanor at first, but then—" His expression turned cold. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not," she said, voice breaking. You kissed me. You—" He slammed the chair back, fury rising to cover shame. "How dare you try to trap me like that? You think because I was drunk you can spin this into some fairy tale? Look at you. Do you really think I would choose you over Elena?" The words sliced through the air. Amale stepped back, her hands trembling. Her heart didn't break in one blow. It shattered in slow motion. The smile from this morning still clung to her lips like a ghost. But her eyes darkened with disbelief, with the cruel truth unraveling before her. "You didn't know it was me," she whispered. Damon said nothing. "You thought I was her." He didn't answer. He didn't apologize. And in that silence, everything died. The trust, the warmth, the illusion. "I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought you loved me, Damon." He turned his back. "You thought wrong." The chair remained tipped, the breakfast untouched, the house silent. Amale walked to the stairs without another word. This time, she didn't whisper goodnight to his back. She didn't owe him that anymore. The suitcase didn't belong there. Amale stood still, breath caught between her ribs, watching the housekeeper quietly close the door behind her, having rolled in the small navy luggage with her careful hands. It rested near the stairs, like an uninvited truth. Damon had ordered it without telling her. Of course he had. And now, the polished marble floors echoed with footsteps she didn't recognize anymore. Her own. Upstairs, the world was quiet, but below, in the dining room, where hope had only yesterday tried to take root, everything had withered. Amale clenched her fingers against her skirt, forcing herself to stay composed. Last night's warmth had faded like a dream she no longer wanted to remember. But her heart still ached with remnants of it. She stepped into the dining room with slow, uncertain grace, clutching a folded note she had written before sunrise. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't desperate. It was just honest. Damon sat at the table, perfectly dressed, staring out the tall windows as if the view of the city held the answers to questions he refused to ask. The morning light skimmed the sharp edges of his face, giving him the look of a sculpture. Cold, untouchable, flawless in form, but hollow within. "I made tea," Amale said softly, setting the note near his plate. "And I just wanted to say I'm sorry if last night made you uncomfortable." He didn't move. "I misunderstood something that wasn't real," she continued. "But it felt real to me. And I thought maybe—" Damon finally turned to face her, and something inside her flinched at the expression he wore. He didn't look confused. He looked disgusted. "Stop," he said, voice low and sharp. "Just stop." She froze. He stood slowly, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape. Then he picked up the note she'd left and tore it cleanly in two, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. "You thought I wanted you," he said, with a short, humorless laugh. That I chose you." Amale swallowed hard, every part of her trembling. "You were tender last night. You thought wrong," he snapped, voice rising. "God, I was drunk. I didn't even know who you were." He walked past her and pointed at the fireplace mantel where a photo frame sat, one of many polished images of his world. In it, Eleanor Stone smiled in a designer gown, flawless and gleaming, her manicured hand resting possessively on Damon's chest. "Look at her," he barked. "You think you could be her?" Amale's gaze moved slowly to the picture, then to him. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. But something inside her cracked, not loudly, not all at once. It was the kind of break that shattered inward. "You're nothing like her," he continued, relentless. "You walk around this house like some obedient servant, ironing suits and brewing tea, like that'll make me forget what you really are. You were assigned to me, not chosen. Do you understand that difference?" She nodded slowly, but it wasn't agreement. It was the body's way of keeping upright when the soul has collapsed. He kept going. "You live in some fantasy that because you smile and say goodnight, like some soft-spoken martyr, I'm going to fall at your feet. I don't want your love. I don't need your loyalty. I need you to understand your place." His words hung in the air like ash. Amale looked down at her hands, the same hands that had washed his clothes, tended his fever, reached out for him in the dark. Hands that had trembled with hope, with desire, with the lie that he might someday reach back. "I never wanted to replace her," she whispered. "I only wanted to be your wife." "You're not my wife," he said coldly. "You're a favor I accepted for the sake of image, a burden dressed in tradition. That's all." Silence roared between them. She didn't cry. Not yet. Amale turned toward the door, walking with a grace that seemed unnatural given the wreckage behind her. But it wasn't dignity she carried. It was the last piece of herself she hadn't given to him. He had taken everything else. On her way to the stairs, she paused beside the suitcase. Her reflection in its metal trim looked like a stranger. She touched her belly, fingers lingering for a moment, not in fear, not in panic, but in revelation. A secret still hers, a piece of Damon that he didn't even know he'd given her. She didn't speak of it. Not yet. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was survival. As she pulled the suitcase toward the door, Damon remained standing, unaware that his cruelty had not just ended a marriage. It had exiled a future he didn't even know he had. He had mistaken lust for control. And now, the only person who had ever truly seen him was gone. The front door clicked shut behind her, but it echoed through the mansion like thunder. Damon stood alone in the silence, a man surrounded by luxury, and yet suddenly, for the first time, he felt the walls closing in, tight, suffocating, empty. The woman he had never tried to understand had left without raising her voice, without accusing, without begging. No storm, no drama, just a suitcase and a silence that pierced deeper than any scream could have. But Damon wasn't grieving. He was angry. Angry at her for daring to touch the parts of himself he didn't want to face. Angry at the guilt that refused to leave his chest since she walked out. Angry that her quiet strength made him feel small. And most of all, furious that somewhere deep down he knew he was wrong. He poured himself another drink, as if the burn could numb the shame clawing up his throat. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky like a judgmental eye, and by afternoon his mind had spiraled so far into ego and denial that when his lawyer arrived, summoned with a single cold text, Damon greeted him with only 2 words: end it. The divorce was drafted in less than a day. No alimony, no property claim, no settlement discussion. Damon didn't care what the papers said. He just wanted to erase
Her. Scrub her name from the marble steps, the guest lists, the future he thought he had under control. He signed the documents with the same hand he had once used to hold her in the dark without knowing her name. There was no ceremony, no conversation, just a courier with an envelope delivered to a cheap motel downtown. Amale read the decree beneath flickering light, sitting on the edge of a lumpy mattress that smelled like old rain. The paper trembled in her hands, not because she hadn't expected this, but because seeing it in ink made the pain feel like stone, heavy and permanent. She didn't cry. She had cried enough for a lifetime in that house where her love had been invisible. Now she sat in silence, one hand pressed gently to her belly beneath a worn coat she had picked from a donation bin earlier that day. It was too thin for the season, the zipper broken, but it covered what she needed it to. Her eyes drifted to the cracked mirror across the room. She barely recognized herself. The warm-toned woman who once tried to set a cold man's world on fire with love was now ash, sitting in a dusty motel room with no family nearby, no bank account, and no place to go. But she was not alone. Her hand moved slowly, protectively over her stomach. The only piece of him she had left. The only part of her love that could not be denied. "You'll be my strength," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as though sharing a sacred promise. "We'll start over. Somewhere they don't know your father's name." She didn't know where she would sleep tomorrow. The room was paid for only one more night. She had no job, no savings, and the only number she had memorized was her mother's. But she had died 3 years ago. But she had something Damon had never understood. She had hope, not the blind, naive kind, but the type forged in the fire of heartbreak, the kind that didn't depend on another person's acceptance to survive. She folded the divorce papers neatly and placed them inside the Bible her mother had given her, now the only possession she truly valued. Then she stood, pulling the coat tight around her, and opened the door to the cold wind outside. It bit through her layers, but she didn't flinch. Amale walked into the night with nothing but her faith, her baby, and a strength she had never known she possessed. She was not walking away from a marriage. She was walking toward herself. And behind her, in a mansion full of mirrors and noise, Damon Voss poured another drink, still trying to forget the only woman who had ever loved him enough to survive him. But some absences echo louder than presence, and he had just created the loudest silence of his life. The air in the cafe was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, a fragrance Damon usually associated with the rare moments when he allowed himself to pause and breathe. But today it felt different, oppressive almost, as he sat across from Elena Stone. Her laughter floated above the din of the busy Starbucks, her voice too loud, too insistent, cutting through Damon's thoughts. He had grown accustomed to her presence, but now something felt wrong. He couldn't put a finger on it. Maybe it was the unease gnawing at his gut, or the coldness that lingered beneath the warmth of the room. He had been in this cafe 100 times, but today it was foreign. His mind wasn't focused on the latest luxury purchase Elena was excitedly describing, or the unimportant chatter she effortlessly threw around. His eyes kept drifting to the door, the sound of the bell ringing each time it opened and closed. It was an ordinary afternoon, until it wasn't. A figure emerged from the back, pushing a cart of clean dishes into the center of the room. Her movement was fluid, calm, and strangely composed. Damon felt the hairs on his neck stand up as he caught a glimpse of her face. It was her. Amale. It wasn't the same Amale he had abandoned. She looked different, harder in some ways, softer in others. Her once glowing skin now appeared slightly dulled, but there was an undeniable strength in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. Her posture was still graceful, though more guarded. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed to defy the circumstances she had been thrust into, and the unmistakable curve of her belly, now swollen with pregnancy, was a stark reminder of the love Damon had callously discarded. She moved as if she were invisible, silently wiping down the tables in front of customers, her focus entirely on her work. Her gaze never wandered to him. She didn't even acknowledge him. Damon's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared himself for the rawness of the moment, for the sight of her standing there, surviving, while he had lived a life that felt increasingly empty and hollow. His mind raced as he struggled to grasp at the remnants of the man he used to be, the man who had built an empire of wealth and success, who had trampled on everything and everyone to secure his place. But here she was, stronger than he ever gave her credit for. Elena noticed Damon's change in demeanor, following his gaze. She furrowed her brow in confusion. "Damon? What is it?" Damon didn't answer immediately. His gaze locked onto Amale's, and for the briefest moment she turned her head, her eyes meeting his. They were the same eyes, calm and steady, but full of so much more now. There was no anger, no bitterness in her expression. It was as if she had already moved on, had let go of everything that had bound her to him. But her silence, it spoke volumes. Her quiet resilience was louder than any words she could have said, and Damon felt the weight of it, the weight of the regret he had buried for so long. Her gaze lingered for only a fraction of a second before she turned her attention back to her task, wiping down another table with swift, efficient movements. And yet, that moment, when their eyes had met, felt like 1,000 words had been exchanged in the space between them. Words that she would never say, words that needed no explanation. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? How could he explain his cruelty? How could he apologize for a lifetime of mistakes? He was a man who had built an empire of power and control, but in this moment he felt small, insignificant. Elena's voice interrupted his thoughts once more, her tone impatient. "Damon, are you listening to me? What's going on?" He turned back to Elena, but his mind was still on Amale, still lost in the echoes of that silent confrontation. I'm sorry, Elena. I think I need a moment." Elena frowned, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the woman across the room. "You don't look like you need a moment. You look like you've seen a ghost." Damon didn't respond. His mind was still reeling. Amale had chosen a life that didn't include him, and he respected her for it, even if it shattered him. His pride, his arrogance, had cost him everything, and in the end it was he who was left with the broken pieces. He stood abruptly, leaving his coffee untouched, and made his way to the counter, his steps unsteady. He felt Elena's eyes on him, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He had no right to be angry, no right to demand anything. The damage he had done was irreparable. And yet, as he walked toward the door, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. Amale was still there, quietly wiping tables, her gaze never straying from her work. She was moving on. She was strong, and no matter how hard he tried, he could never erase the truth. She had been his redemption, and he had thrown it away. As he stepped out into the cold street, Damon felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt. A deep, suffocating guilt. He knew now that no amount of money or status could ever undo the damage he had done. But the silence between them, it spoke louder than any apology ever could. Damon stood frozen in the doorway of the cafe, his mind racing, heart pounding. The brief encounter with Amale had shattered the fragile walls he had built around himself. He had come here with Elena, intending to enjoy a quiet afternoon. But now everything felt hollow, meaningless. The weight of his past mistakes pressed down on him, suffocating him. Elena's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and insistent. "Damon, what's going on with you? You've been distant all day." He turned to face her, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "I'm fine, Elena. Just tired." But Elena wasn't convinced. She studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "You're not fine. Something's bothering you." Damon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's nothing. Just seeing someone I used to know." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Damon hesitated, then shook his head. "It's not important." But Elena wasn't one to let things go. "If it's bothering you, it is important. Who was it?" Damon looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It was Amale." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. "Amale? Your ex-wife?" Damon nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't expect to see her here. I didn't expect to feel anything." Elena's expression softened, and she reached out to touch his arm. "Damon, you can't change the past. What's important is the present. We're here together now." Damon looked up at her, his eyes filled with turmoil. "But I hurt her, Elena. I abandoned her when she needed me the most. And now she's carrying our child, alone." Elena withdrew her hand, her face hardening. "So what? You're going to run back to her? After everything?" Damon shook his head. I'm not running back. But I can't just pretend nothing happened. I can't ignore the consequences of my actions." Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Well, maybe you
Should. Because I don't have time for someone who's still hung up on their past." She stormed out of the cafe, leaving Damon standing alone, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. He sat back down, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had tried to move on, to bury the past. But seeing Amale again had reopened old wounds. He had been a fool to think he could escape the consequences of his actions. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. He glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Hesitant, he answered. "Damon." His heart skipped a beat at the sound of her voice. "Amale?" "Yes," she replied softly. "I didn't want to call, but I didn't know who else to turn to." Damon's throat tightened. "What is it? Are you okay?" I need help," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm scared, Damon. I don't know what to do." Without thinking, Damon stood up, his decision made. "Where are you?" Damon sat in the dimly lit room, the weight of his own choices pressing down on him. The lavish lifestyle he had once taken for granted now felt like a distant memory, a life he had willingly abandoned. His former friends, the ones who had once admired his wealth and status, had turned their backs on him. He was alone, left to confront the consequences of his actions. As he sifted through a drawer filled with remnants of his past, his fingers brushed against something soft. Pulling it out, he found a scarf, Amale's scarf. The fabric was worn, the edges frayed, but it still held the faint scent of her perfume. It was the last trace of her warmth, a reminder of the love he had discarded so carelessly. Tears welled up in his eyes as memories flooded back. He remembered the way she had looked at him with such hope, the way she had tried to reach him even when he had pushed her away. He had been blind to her love, deaf to her pleas, and now he was left with nothing but regret. He held the scarf to his face, inhaling deeply. The scent was faint, but it was enough to bring her presence back to him. He could almost hear her voice, feel her touch, but it was all just an echo now. The silence in the room was deafening, a stark contrast to the noise of his former life. He had once been surrounded by people, by laughter, by the constant hum of activity. Now, there was only emptiness. Damon stood up, pacing the room. His mind raced with thoughts of Amale, of the life they could have had. He had been a fool, blinded by his own arrogance and pride. He had let her slip through his fingers, and now he was paying the price. He stopped in front of the window, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the world he had once been a part of. But it felt foreign to him now, a world that no longer held any meaning. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. He glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Hesitant, he answered. Amale? His voice cracked as he spoke her name. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then a soft voice replied, Damon. His heart skipped a beat. He had never imagined he would hear her voice again. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry for everything. There was a long silence before she spoke again. I know you are. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Damon closed his eyes, the tears finally falling. He had lost her once, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way to make things right. Damon sat alone in the dimly lit room, the weight of his past pressing down on him. The once grand mansion now felt like a hollow shell, echoing with memories of a life he had squandered. The lavish furnishings, the opulent decor, none of it mattered anymore. He had lost everything that truly mattered. His gaze fell upon the scarf, a simple yet profound reminder of Amale. The fabric, once vibrant, had faded over time, much like his feelings of love and remorse. He had been blind to her devotion, deaf to her silent pleas. Now all that remained were the remnants of a love he had taken for granted. He stood up, pacing the room, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, anger, shame, sorrow. They all collided within him. He had been a fool, a coward, unable to face the consequences of his actions. He had pushed away the one person who had truly cared for him, the one person who had seen past his facade. His phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his reverie. He glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Hesitant, he answered. Amal? His voice cracked as he spoke her name. There was a long pause before she responded. Damon, she said softly. I didn't want to call, but I didn't know who else to turn to. His heart clenched in his chest. What is it? Are you okay? I'm scared, Damon, she admitted, her voice trembling. I'm alone, and I don't know what to do. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been the one to leave her alone, to cast her aside when she needed him the most. And now, she was reaching out to him. Not for help, but for solace, for comfort. I'll be there, he said, his voice firm with resolve. Just tell me where you are. There was a brief pause before she spoke again. I'm at the old park, near the swings. Please hurry. Damon didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what awaited him, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let her face this alone. As he stepped out into the cold night, the weight of his past mistakes pressed down on him. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could make things right. Damon stood at the edge of the park, the moonlight casting long shadows over the empty swings. His heart raced as he scanned the area, his breath visible in the crisp night air. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound made him flinch. He had come here, to this place, where memories of Amale lingered like ghosts, hoping to find her, to make amends. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth. Damon closed his eyes, letting the familiar smells ground him. He had once walked these paths with Amale, their laughter echoing in the stillness, their hands intertwined. Now those moments felt like fragments of a dream, slipping further away with each passing day. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He pulled it out, his hands trembling as he read the message. "I'm here, by the old oak tree." Damon's pulse quickened. He turned, his gaze falling on the massive oak tree that stood at the far end of the park. Its branches reached out like arms, sheltering the ground beneath. He had carved their initials into its bark years ago, a promise of forever that now seemed naive. As he approached the tree, he saw her, a figure silhouetted against the night sky, her back to him. Amale. Her presence was a balm to his wounded soul, yet it also tore at him. The woman he had wronged stood before him, carrying the weight of their shared history. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to beg for her forgiveness, but the words caught in his throat. Amale turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger there, no bitterness, just a quiet sadness, a resignation that spoke volumes. She had moved on, built a life without him, and yet here she was, standing in front of him. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken years. Damon swallowed hard, stepping closer. "I had to," he whispered. "I owe you that much." She shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You don't owe me anything." "But I do," he insisted, his voice breaking. "I ruined everything. I left you when you needed me most. I was selfish, blind to what mattered." Amala's gaze softened, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to shrink. "We both made mistakes," she murmured, "but we can't change the past." Damon reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the bark of the oak tree. "I carved our names here," he said quietly. "A promise I couldn't keep." Amale stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "Promises are easy to make," she replied. "It's the keeping that counts." They stood in silence, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for them to find the words that would bridge the gap between the past and the present. Finally, Damon spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, "but I hope, someday, you'll find it in your heart to let go of the pain I caused." Amale looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "I already have," she said softly. "Not for you. For me." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Damon standing beneath the oak tree, the echoes of her words lingering in the night air. The winter sun barely pierced through the thick grey clouds as Damon stood at the threshold of the community shelter, his clothes tattered, eyes sunken, and heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. It had been 3 days since he began searching for her, 3 days without sleep, food, or rest. Only the burning guilt inside him kept him upright. Inside, the walls were plain, and the air smelled of coffee and warm bread. There were quiet conversations, the soft clink of cutlery, the muffled sound of children playing behind closed doors. And then he saw her. Amale stood at the far end of the room, gently rocking a bassinet with one hand and folding blankets with the other. Her hair was pulled into a bun, her face bare and beautiful in a way that fame and filters could never imitate. She wore simplicity like a crown. Damon froze. Every step toward her felt like walking barefoot across broken glass, but he didn't stop. Not this time. She sensed him before she saw him. Slowly, she turned around. Their eyes met. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her gaze searched his face, not with bitterness or anger, but with a cautious, guarded silence. "I've been looking for you," Damon whispered, his voice cracked and hoarse. "I had everything, and I lost it all. And still, nothing hurt as much as losing you." Amala didn't speak at first. She stepped slightly aside, revealing the baby, swaddled in a pale yellow blanket, fast asleep. Damon's breath hitched. He dropped to his knees, tears streaming freely down his cheeks. "Is that?" His voice broke. "Our son," Amala said softly. "I named him Eli. It means ascended." Damon wept silently, his head bowed, fingers trembling as he reached out. Amala didn't stop him. She watched as he touched his son's tiny hand, and Eli, as if sensing him, curled his fingers around Damon's. "I don't deserve this," Damon whispered. "I don't deserve you. But I swear, if you give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life making things right." Amala crouched beside him, gently lifting his chin. "I didn't want revenge," she said quietly. "I wanted peace. I wanted to be loved. What I gave you wasn't just duty. It was devotion. What you broke wasn't just a marriage. It was trust." "I know," Damon said, "and I can't fix the past. But if there's even a corner of your heart that still remembers what we could have been, please, let me build that future now." There was silence, a long, aching silence filled with shared memories, good and bad, until Amala finally whispered, "Then start not with promises, Damon. Start with presence." Damon nodded. "I'm here, for you, for him, for every day after this one." She exhaled slowly, then extended her hand. He took it like it was the first time they'd ever touched. In a way, it was. Weeks passed. Damon found work cleaning a bookstore. Humble beginnings for a man once drenched in power. But he returned to Amal and Eli every night, his hands calloused, his heart soft. He learned how to cook simple meals. He learned how to hold his son without fear. He learned how to laugh again. Amala didn't rush to forgive. She watched, she waited, and in time she smiled, not out of habit, but because her heart began to heal. They moved into a tiny apartment with peeling paint and squeaky floors. Damon painted each wall himself. Amala decorated with plants and pictures. The sound of their baby's giggles filled every room like sunshine. One evening, as they sat together watching Eli sleep, Damon took Amala's hand and kissed her knuckles. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For being the only light in a world I refused to see." Amala rested her head on his shoulder, her heart no longer aching, but blooming. Love wasn't perfect, but love, true love, could rise from ruin. And they did, together.